It is a privilege to greet you on behalf of the government and people of St. Lucia. At the outset, allow me to associate myself with the statements made on behalf of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS, the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, and the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, the OACP. It has been 5 years since ministers last met in this format. In this short space of time, the world has become a much different place. We have had to endure assaults on multilateralism. Unilateralism is once again being seen by some as their preferred modality for global engagement. And we are still battling the worst global public health pandemic in years, an occurrence which has further exposed the extent of the vulnerabilities facing small island developing states, SIDS. Then, of course, there is the climate crisis, with the associated natural disasters and environmental emergencies which continue to impact us. St. Lucia and other SIDS are not contributors to the climate crisis, but we are the most impacted. And we continue to call for action, especially on the part of the major polluters, to restore some balance to our planet. Like many SIDS, we rely on climate-sensitive sectors for trade and livelihoods, such as tourism, agriculture, and fisheries. And in this regard, our very existence is on the line. When the WTO was created over 25 years ago, St. Lucia's trade and economic development were buttressed by access to trade preferences and development support from the international community. This was out of a shared recognition that we are not at all equals, and that this inequality required approaches to treatment which were differentiated. Unfortunately, this understanding of our reality is no longer held by some of the most influential and powerful among us, and as a result, we are now denied much of the support which we once enjoyed. Areas of economic activity such as banana production and export and offshore financial services have either collapsed as a result of the loss of preferences or systematically savaged by the extraterritorial application of standards imposed upon us, which we had no opportunity to influence. We cannot see MC12 as divorced from these realities. I have a responsibility to the people of St. Lucia to call for fairness, equity, and justice in the workings of the World Trade Organization. As a small, open economy with a heavy reliance on international trade and broader participation in the global economy to meet its development objectives, St. Lucia needs a WTO and a multilateral trading system which is responsive to its economic development needs as enshrined in the Marrakesh Agreement. Unfortunately, too many developing countries, including SIDS, find many of the tangible benefits from our participation in the multilateral trading system to be too elusive. It is against this backdrop that I call for WTO members, especially the developed members, to recommit to allow for sufficient policy space for developing and least developed members to achieve their development objectives. Like many other members, St. Lucia also recognizes that after a quarter century of existence, the WTO needs reform and modernizing to better meet the challenges of the 21st century. This reform must be open, transparent, inclusive, and indeed comprehensive in order to bring about the much needed improvement of the operations and the negotiating and rulemaking functions of the WTO. An element of inertia has certainly crept into the organization. The fact that we have had a fisheries subsidies negotiation going on for 20 years, that we find it difficult or take an inordinate amount of time to agree on many things, including pressing global problems such as an appropriate trade policy response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that for many years we have been far apart on important issues in agriculture trade policy. All of this provide evidence of lethargy and point to the necessity for urgent reform of the way that we do business. If I may speak briefly to fisheries, subsidies, and agriculture. Regarding the former, St. Lucia is pleased that we have made appreciable progress since ministers met in July of last year. We look forward to a substantive outcome in fisheries subsidies, which is consistent with our mandate, that is, to reduce and/or eliminate harmful fisheries subsidies and provide appropriate and effective special and differential treatment to developing and least developed countries. On agriculture, we appreciate that this is a difficult area, especially since it involves issues of importance to vulnerable populations in our jurisdictions. Nonetheless, we have to take action to address distortions to agricultural markets, including those arising from subsidies, export restrictions, and lack of transparency, which negatively impact on farmers in countries like St. Lucia. We have to also accord even more policy space to developing and least developed countries in areas such as domestic support and public stockholding, both of which are vital to food security. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as I close, let me renew St. Lucia's commitment to a successful conference. I thank you.